at a natural pace of 150 to 160 words per minute. Maintain clarity and light emotional nuance suitable for American storytelling. Lena Washington had been at Mama Joe's diner for barely 2 weeks, but it felt like she'd been dodging landmines her whole life. The air in the diner was thick with tension every time Marcus Langston strutted through the door, his polished loafers clicking on the checkered floor like a countdown to chaos. He was the kind of guy who could make a room shrink just by showing up. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a Rolex that screamed money and a scowl that screamed trouble. To the folks of Willow Creek, Marcus wasn't just a real estate tycoon who owned half the town. He was a walking storm, ready to tear into anyone who didn't meet his impossible standards. And Lena, the new black waitress with a quick smile and a worn notebook tucked in her apron, was learning fast that surviving Marcus meant keeping your head down and your mouth shut. But Lena wasn't built for that. Every morning, Marcus would claim his spot at the corner booth, the one with the best view of Main Street, and bark orders like he was running a boardroom instead of ordering coffee. Black coffee, scalding hot, not a degree less, and don't you dare let it sit more than 30 seconds before it's on my table, he'd snap, his voice cutting through the diner's hum like a knife. The staff scurried. Tommy, the teenage busboy with a nervous stutter, would nearly drop his tray. Sarah, the veteran cook with a smoker's rasp, would mutter curses under her breath. Even Mama Joe herself, who'd run the diner for 30 years, would tighten her lips and avoid his gaze. Lena watched it all, her dark eyes sharp and steady, taking mental notes while her hands poured coffee with a precision that came from years of practice. She'd grown up in a cramped apartment on the edge of town, raised by her grandmother Ruby, who'd worked double shifts at a laundromat to keep them afloat. Ruby's voice echoed in Lena's head. "Your worth ain't in their eyes, girl, it's in your soul." Those words were her armor, but they didn't stop the sting when Marcus's gaze landed on her. He didn't just demand perfection, he made it personal. "You're new, aren't you?" he'd said on her second day, his tone dripping with condescension as he sized her up. Her neat braids, her faded sneakers, the way she stood a little too tall for his liking. "Don't know why Joe keeps hiring folks like you. Probably can't even get a simple order right." The words hit like a slap, but Lena just nodded, her face a mask of calm, and said, "I'll do my best, sir." Inside, though, her blood was simmering. She wasn't naive. She'd heard worse growing up in Willow Creek, where folks still whispered about her kind staying on the wrong side of the tracks. But Marcus's words weren't just cruel. They were a challenge, like he was daring her to break. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Each day brought a new test. Marcus would send back his coffee if it wasn't hot enough, complain the sugar packets weren't aligned on the table, or snap at Lena for standing too close while refilling his cup. Once, he caught her glancing at her notebook during a break, scribbling lines of poetry in the back booth, and sneered, "What's that? Writing your little dreams? Don't kid yourself. You're here to serve coffee, not play poet." The diner went quiet, every head turning to see how Lena would react. She felt the heat rise in her chest, the urge to snap back, to tell him she'd been published in a local zine, that her words had made people cry at open mic nights in high school. But she saw Tommy's wide, nervous eyes from across the room, and Sarah's subtle shake of her head, and she swallowed it down. "Yes, sir," she said, tucking the notebook away, her fingers trembling just enough to betray the storm inside her. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every kid like Tommy, who'd come to her after a shift, voice shaking, saying, "I don't know how you do it, Lena. He makes me feel like nothing." At a natural pace of 150 to 160 words per minute, maintain clarity and light emotional nuance suitable for American storytelling. Lena's strength wasn't loud, but it was fierce. She poured every ounce of her pride into her work, making sure every cup she served was perfect, every table spotless, every smile genuine despite the venom Marcus threw her way. At night, when the diner closed, she'd sit in the back booth, her notebook open, pouring her anger and dreams into lines that cut like a blade. They see my skin, my place, my name, but not the fire that fuels my flame. Writing was her release, her way of holding on to herself when Marcus tried to strip her down. She remembered her grandmother's stories about scrubbing floors while white customers sneered, about smiling through the pain, because sometimes, Lena, you gotta outlast 'em to outshine 'em. Ruby had died a year ago, leaving Lena her old radio and a dog-eared copy of Maya Angelou's poems, and Lena carried that legacy in every step she took. But the pressure was building. One morning, Marcus went after Tommy, the busboy, with a cruelty that made Lena's stomach churn. Tommy had spilled a drop of water while clearing a table, and Marcus was on him like a hawk. "You're useless, kid," he barked, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "Can't even clean a table right. Why do they keep you around?" Tommy's face went red, his hands shaking as he stammered an apology, and Lena saw the tears he was fighting to hide. She was wiping down the counter, her rag moving in tight, furious circles, when Marcus turned his gaze on her. "And you," he said, his voice low and mean, "don't think you're any better. People like you don't belong in a place like this. Stick to what you're good for, cleaning up after folks like me." The diner froze, forks clinking against plates, every eye on Lena. She felt the weight of it all, their stares, their silence, the way even Sarah looked away, too scared to intervene. Her heart pounded, her grandmother's voice ringing in her ears. Your worth ain't in their eyes. She wanted to scream, to throw his words back in his face, but she knew the cost. Lose her job, lose her chance to save for college, lose the dream of turning her poetry into something real. Then something unexpected happened. Old Man Jenkins, a regular who sat at the counter with his coffee and crossword, cleared his throat. He was a retired schoolteacher, grizzled and quiet, who taught Lena in 10th grade and always tipped her extra. "Leave her be, Marcus," he said, his voice steady but firm. "She's worth 10 of you." The words hung in the air, a small act of defiance that made Marcus's eyes narrow. He didn't respond, just tossed a 20 on the table and left, but Lena caught Jenkins's eye as he nodded at her, a silent promise that she wasn't alone. That moment lit a spark in her. She wasn't just enduring Marcus's cruelty, she was starting to see the cracks in his armor, the way his need to belittle others came from something broken inside him. She didn't know what yet, but she knew she'd find out, and when she did, she'd be ready. Lena went back to work, her hands steady now, her mind racing. She wasn't just serving coffee anymore, she was biding her time, sharpening her words like weapons. Tommy came up to her later, his voice barely a whisper. "Thanks for not letting him get to you, Lena. It helps me keep going." She squeezed her shoulder, her smile soft but fierce. "We're tougher than he thinks, Tommy, way tougher." As she scribbled in her notebook that night, the diner dark except for the glow of the jukebox, Lena felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just surviving Marcus Langston, she was preparing to fight back, not with fists or shouts, but with the one thing he couldn't touch, her truth. At a natural pace of 150 to 160 words per minute, maintain clarity and light emotional nuance suitable for American storytelling. Lena Washington had been slinging plates at Mama Joe's diner for just under a month, but it felt like she'd been walking on eggshells forever. Willow Creek was a small town, the kind where everybody knew your business, and Mama Joe's was its beating heart, a greasy spoon where truckers, farmers, and retirees swapped stories over bottomless coffee. But when Marcus Langston rolled in, the chatter died, forks froze mid-bite, and the whole place turned into a pressure cooker. Marcus, with his slick suits and a smirk that could curdle milk, wasn't just some rich guy. He was the guy who owned the strip mall, the new condos, half the farmland outside town. He walked into Mama Joe's like he owned that too, and nobody dared tell him otherwise. Lena, though, was different. She was new, black, and barely 20, with a fire in her eyes that nobody, not even Marcus, could snuff out. She carried a beat-up leather journal in her apron, stuffed with poems she'd written since she was a kid, and a chip on her shoulder from growing up on the rough side of Willow Creek. She wasn't here to make waves, but she wasn't about to let anyone walk over her either. Marcus had a way of making every shift feel like a gauntlet. He'd plop down in his corner booth, the one with the cracked vinyl seat and the best view of the street, and start firing off orders like a drill sergeant. "Coffee, black, hot enough to burn, and don't you dare let it sit longer than 20 seconds, he'd bark, his voice slicing through the diner's morning buzz. Lena watched the others scramble. Tommy, the lanky busboy who just graduated high school, would fumble his water pitcher. Sarah, the cook who'd seen it all in her 40 years, would grit her teeth and flip pancakes harder than necessary. Even Mama Jo, who'd been pouring coffee since before Lena was born, would hover near the register, her hands fidgeting. Lena kept her cool, pouring Marcus's coffee with a steady hand, her face blank but her mind racing. She'd grown up in a trailer park with her mom, Denise, a nurse who'd work nights to keep them fed. Denise used to say, "Lena, you don't owe nobody your pride, but you gotta pick your battles." That advice was the only thing keeping Lena from telling Marcus exactly where he could stick his attitude. Marcus didn't just demand perfection, he made it a sport to cut people down. "New girl," he'd sneered on her first week, eyeing her faded jeans and the braids she'd spent hours on. "You look like you belong in the back, scrubbing dishes, not out here serving me." The words landed like a punch, and Lena felt the diner's eyes on her, waiting for her to crack. She didn't. "I'll get your order right, sir," she said, her voice even, but inside she was burning. She'd heard that kind of talk before, kids at school whispering about her ghetto clothes, teachers assuming she wouldn't amount to much. But Marcus was next-level cruel, and he knew it. He'd lean back, smirking, like he was waiting for her to cry or quit. Lena just kept moving, wiping counters, refilling sugars, her journal burning a hole in her apron. She'd scribble in it during breaks, lines like, "They throw stones, but I build castles. My roots run deeper than their hassles." Poetry was her lifeline, a way to turn pain into power, something she'd learned from her mom's old gospel records, the ones they'd play on Sunday mornings when the world felt a little kinder. The days dragged on, each one a test of how much Lena could take. Marcus would send back his coffee if it wasn't scalding, complain the napkins weren't folded right, or snap at her for smiling too much. "What's so funny? You think this is a game?" One morning, he caught her jotting in her journal behind the counter and let out a laugh that made her skin crawl. "What's that, your diary? Writing about how you're going to be a big shot someday? Stick to pouring coffee, sweetheart." The diner went dead quiet, every head swiveling to see what Lena would do. She felt the heat in her cheeks, the urge to fire back, that her poems had won a county contest, that she'd read them at the library to a room full of people who clapped like she was somebody. But she saw Tommy's nervous glance, Sarah's tight-lipped warning, and bit her tongue. "Just notes, sir," she said, slipping the journal away, her hands shaking with the effort to stay calm. She wasn't just protecting herself, she was shielding Tommy, who'd confessed to her one night after closing, his voice barely audible. "Marcus makes me feel like I'm nothing, Lena. How do you keep going?" Lena's strength was quiet, but it was steel. She threw herself into her work, making sure every plate she served was perfect, every smile she gave was real, even when Marcus's words cut deep. At night, when the diner was empty, she'd sit by the jukebox, its neon glow casting shadows on her journal as she wrote, "He thinks he owns this town, this heart, but I'm carving my name where his shadows part." Her mom's voice was her anchor, Denise, who'd come home bone-tired from the hospital, but still read Lena's poems, saying, "These words, baby, they're your ticket out." Lena was saving every tip for college, dreaming of a degree in creative writing, but Marcus's cruelty made her feel like she was fighting a losing battle. Still, she kept going, for herself, for her mom, for every kid like Tommy who needed to see someone stand tall. Then came the morning Marcus crossed a line. Tommy, trying to clear a table, knocked over a salt shaker, and Marcus pounced. "You're a damn disaster, kid," he roared, loud enough to stop the diner cold. "Can't even handle a table without screwing it up. Why do they keep you around?" Tommy's face crumpled, his hands trembling as he mumbled an apology, and Lena, wiping down the counter, felt her heart twist. Marcus turned to her, his eyes glinting with malice. "And you don't think you're any better. People like you're here to clean up my messes, not act like you belong." The words were a gut punch, and the diner held its breath, waiting for Lena to break. She didn't. Her hands froze on the rag, her jaw tight, but her mom's voice rang in her head. "Pick your battles." She wanted to scream, to tell him she'd outlast him, but the weight of her job, her dreams, her mom's sacrifices kept her silent. Then, out of nowhere, a voice cut through the tension. Miss Ellie, an elderly black woman who came every morning for her tea and toast, set her cup down hard. "Marcus Langston, you ain't as big as you think," she said, her voice sharp but steady. "This girl's got more heart than you'll ever know." The diner gasped, and Marcus's face darkened, but he didn't snap back. He just threw a bill on the table and stormed out, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Miss Ellie caught Lena's eye and gave her a nod, like she was passing a torch. Lena felt it, a spark of defiance, a promise that she wasn't alone. She wasn't just surviving Marcus anymore, she was sizing him up, waiting for the right moment to show him who she really was.
At a natural pace of 150 to 160 words per minute. Maintain clarity and light emotional nuance suitable for American storytelling. Lena went back to work, her hands steady but her mind on fire. She wasn't just pouring coffee, she was biding her time, her journal filling with words that felt like weapons. Tommy sidled up to her later, his voice low. "Lena, you're tougher than I'll ever be. Thanks for, not letting him win." She gave him a small smile, her heart still racing. "We're tougher than he knows, Tommy. Just wait." As she closed the diner that night, the jukebox playing an old Aretha Franklin tune, Lena wrote one last line in her journal. "He thinks he's king, but I'm the storm." She was ready for whatever came next. The air in Mama Joe's diner was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. It was a Thursday morning, the kind of busy rush where every booth was packed with Willow Creek regulars. Truckers scarfing down eggs, retirees lingering over coffee, and kids sneaking in before school. But when Marcus Langston stormed through the door, his fancy coat flapping and his eyes like daggers, the whole place went quiet, like someone hit pause on the jukebox. Lena Washington, wiping down the counter with her usual steady hands, felt her stomach knot. She'd been dealing with Marcus's nonsense for weeks. His snide remarks about her place, his impossible demands for coffee hot enough to melt steel, his way of making everyone feel small. But today, something felt different, like a storm was brewing, and she was standing right in its path. Her leather journal, tucked in her apron, felt heavier than usual, its pages full of poems she'd poured her heart into, words she'd kept hidden from Marcus's sneer. She caught Tommy's nervous glance from across the diner, his hands fumbling with a tray, and Sarah's tight-lipped nod from the kitchen. They all knew Marcus was a ticking time bomb, and today he was ready to blow. It started with a coffee spill, not even a big one, just a few drops that splashed onto the saucer when Lena set Marcus's cup down. His head snapped up, his face twisting like she'd personally insulted his entire family. "What the hell is this?" he bellowed, loud enough to make a kid at the next booth flinch. "You call this service? Can't even pour a damn coffee without screwing it up?" Lena froze, her hand still on the pot, her heart pounding like it was trying to break free. She'd heard worse from him, comments about her braids, her background, how she'd never be more than a waitress in a nowhere town like Willow Creek. But this felt personal, like he was gunning for her. Before she could respond, he shoved the saucer across the table, letting it clatter to the floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "You're done here," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "I want you gone, girl. People like you don't belong in a place like this." The diner went dead silent, every eye on Lena, waiting for her to crumble. She felt the sting of his words, the way they cut into her like a blade, tearing at the pride her mom, Denise, had spent years building in her. "You don't owe nobody your pride," Denise's voice echoed in her head, but the weight of Marcus's glare, the stares from the crowd, the fear in Tommy's eyes, it was almost too much. Then something snapped. Lena set the coffee pot down, her hands steady despite the fire raging in her chest. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Tommy, for Sarah, for every person Marcus had ever made feel like dirt. She straightened up, her dark eyes locking onto his, and took a step closer to his booth. "Mr. Langston," she said, her voice calm but sharp, like a blade wrapped in velvet. "You don't get to talk to me like that. You don't get to talk to anyone like that." The diner gasped, a collective intake of breath that made the air hum. Marcus's smirk faltered, his eyes widening like he couldn't believe she dared to open her mouth. Lena didn't stop. She reached into her apron, pulled out her journal, and flipped it open to a page she'd written just last night. "You think your money makes you king," she said, her voice rising, clear and strong. "But let me tell you something. I wrote this for people like you." And then she started reading, her words filling the diner like a gospel hymn. "You build your throne on broken backs, spit on dreams to hide your cracks, but my roots run deep, my heart's alive. I'll rise, and you can't survive." Each line hit like a punch, her voice steady but blazing, turning every head in the room. The words weren't just poetry, they were her truth, her defiance, her mom's late-night prayers, and her own sleepless nights poured onto the page. Marcus's face went from shock to fury, his hands gripping the table so hard his knuckles turned white. "You little," he started, but Lena cut him off, her voice louder now, unshaken. "You're not as big as you think, Mr. Langston. You tear people down because you're scared of what happens when folks like me stop bowing to you." The diner was a powder keg, every patron leaning forward, some nodding, others whispering. Then, out of nowhere, a gravelly voice broke the silence. "She's right, Marcus." It was Old Man Jenkins, the retired schoolteacher who'd taught Lena in 10th grade, standing up from his usual spot at the counter. His hands trembled, but his eyes were fierce. "I taught this girl, and she's got more brains and heart than you'll ever have. You want to know the truth? You're no self-made man. Your daddy handed you that empire, and you've been riding his coattails ever since." A murmur rippled through the crowd, heads turning as the secret spilled out. Jenkins wasn't done. "Lena wrote poems that won contests when she was 16. She's got a future you can't even dream of. So how about you sit down and shut up for once?" The diner erupted, soft at first, then louder, as patrons started clapping, some standing up. Miss Ellie, the elderly woman who'd spoken up for Lena before, slammed her teacup down and said, "About damn time someone told him." A trucker in a flannel shirt added, "You don't own us, Langston." Marcus's face was a mask of rage and disbelief, his usual swagger crumbling under the weight of the room's defiance. Lena stood there, her journal still open, her heart pounding but her head high. She'd spent weeks swallowing his insults, hiding her dreams, but now they were out in the open, and she felt like she could breathe for the first time in forever. Marcus tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but the crowd's energy drowned him out. He grabbed his coat and stormed out, the glass door slamming behind him, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Lena looked around, seeing Tommy's wide-eyed awe, Sarah's proud nod, Jenkins's quiet smile. She'd taken a stand, not just for herself, but for everyone Marcus had ever hurt. And in that moment, Mama Joe's wasn't just a diner, it was a battlefield, and Lena had just won the first round.
At a natural pace of 150 to 160 words per minute, maintain clarity and light emotional nuance suitable for American storytelling. The morning after Lena Washington's showdown with Marcus Langston, Mama Joe's diner felt like it had taken a deep breath and let it out for the first time in years. The usual clatter of plates and chatter of Willow Creek regulars filled the air, but there was something new, a lightness, like the whole place had shaken off a heavy coat. Lena moved through her shift with her usual steady hands, pouring coffee and flashing her warm smile, but she could feel the eyes on her, not with fear or pity, but with something closer to awe. Truckers tipped their hats, retirees whispered her name like she was a hometown hero, and Tommy, the shy busboy, kept grinning at her like she'd hung the moon. Sarah, the cook who'd seen every kind of mess in her 40 years, slapped Lena on the back and said, "Girl, you lit a fire under this place." Lena just nodded, her leather journal still tucked in her apron, its pages brimming with poems that had turned a diner into a battlefield. She wasn't sure what came next. Her heart was still racing from standing up to Marcus, from hearing Old Man Jenkins and Miss Ellie back her up, but she knew things would never be the same. She felt taller, not because she'd won, but because she'd shown everyone, including herself, that she could stand her ground. Her mom's voice echoed in her head. "Lena, you don't owe nobody your pride." That pride was her fuel, but it came with a quiet ache. She'd put a target on her back, and Marcus wasn't the type to let a public humiliation slide. Marcus, meanwhile, was a wreck. He'd sped out of Willow Creek in his sleek black SUV, gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles ached, his mind replaying Lena's poem and the diner's applause like a bad song stuck on repeat. Back in his sprawling mansion on the edge of town, he paced the polished floors, the kind of place that screamed money but felt colder than a freezer. He'd built his life on being untouchable, Willow Creek's king, the guy who could buy or break anyone. But Lena, a waitress barely out of her teens, had cracked that armor with a few lines of poetry and a look that didn't flinch. He hated her for it, hated the way her words had stripped him bare, hated the truth in Old Man Jenkins's jab about his daddy's money. Marcus wasn't self-made, he'd inherited his empire, and deep down he knew he'd been coasting on it ever since. That night, he didn't touch his usual bourbon. He sat in the dark, staring out at the town's twinkling lights, feeling smaller than he ever had. Lena's voice kept haunting him. "You tear people down because you're scared." Scared? Him? The idea made his stomach churn, but he couldn't shake it. He wanted to march back to Mama Joe's and reassert his dominance, make them all cower again. But the thought of facing Lena's steady gaze made him hesitate, and that hesitation pissed him off even more. Back at the diner, the ripple effects of Lena's stand were spreading. The staff weren't just going through the motions anymore. They were talking back, laughing louder, moving with a confidence Marcus had always crushed. Sarah started sharing stories over the grill, tales of Marcus's past cruelties. The time he'd gotten a server fired for a smudge on his glass, or how he laughed when a kid dropped a tray. "He's been lording over this town too long," she said, flipping a pancake with a grin. "Lena, you woke us up." Lena didn't know how to take the praise. She'd just done what felt right, what her mom had taught her about holding on to your worth. But she saw the change in Tommy, who stood a little straighter now, and in Mama Joe, who started humming gospel tunes while she worked the register.
Lena had an idea, something bold that came from the journal she'd always kept hidden. "What if we turned this place into something more?" she said one night after closing, her voice soft but sure. "Like an open mic night where folks can share their stories, their songs, their poems." Sarah raised an eyebrow, but Tommy's eyes lit up. "Like what you did with Marcus?" he asked. Lena laughed, a little nervous but excited. "Yeah, but for everybody. Let's make this diner a place where people feel seen." Mama Jo overheard and clapped her hands. "Lena, you're onto something. Let's do it." The first open mic night was a gamble, but it was like Willow Creek had been waiting for it. The diner was packed, string lights strung up around the booths, the jukebox turned off for once. Lena kicked it off, reading a poem about her mom, Denise, who'd worked nights as a nurse to keep them afloat. "Her hands held lives, her heart held mine. She taught me to shine where shadows climb." The room was spellbound. Truckers wiped their eyes, Miss Ellie nodded like she was in church, and even Old Man Jenkins clapped louder than anyone. Tommy read a shaky poem about his dad's old pickup truck, and Sarah belted out a blues song that had everyone stomping. The diner wasn't just a place to eat anymore. It was a stage, a sanctuary, a middle finger to anyone who thought they could keep people small. Word spread, and soon folks from neighboring towns were showing up, sharing their own stories, their own truths. Marcus couldn't stay away. He showed up a week after the showdown, quieter than usual, his usual swagger dialed down. He ordered his coffee, watched the bustle, and said nothing when Lena served him with her usual calm. But his eyes kept drifting to her, to the way she moved, like she owned the place now, not him. He tried to reclaim his old edge, snapping at Tommy once about a slow refill, but it felt hollow, and Tommy didn't flinch like he used to. Marcus saw the flyers for the open mic night taped to the counter and scoffed, but he came back the next week, sitting in the back, watching Lena read another poem that hit like a freight train. He didn't clap, but he didn't leave either. Something was shifting in him, a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. He started leaving bigger tips, not just for Lena, but for everyone, like he was trying to buy back a piece of the respect he lost. One night, he caught Lena's eye as she read, and for a split second, he didn't look away. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was something, a flicker of shame mixed with admiration. Lena didn't trust it, but she saw it, and it made her stand a little taller. At a natural pace of 150 to 160 words per minute. Maintain clarity and light emotional nuance suitable for American storytelling. Lena was changing too. She wasn't just the new waitress anymore. She was the heart of Mama Jo's, the one who'd turned a diner into a community. But it wasn't easy. She'd lie awake at night, her mom's old radio playing softly, wondering if she'd pushed too far, if Marcus would find a way to make her pay. She thought of her mom, who'd always said, "You don't just fight for yourself, Lena, you fight for everyone who can't." That kept her going, even when the whispers about Marcus's power, his ability to shut down the diner, to ruin lives, crept back in. But then she'd see Tommy practicing his poems, or Sarah joking with customers like she used to, and she knew she'd done something bigger than herself. One evening, as she was setting up for open mic night, Miss Ellie pulled her aside. "You know, Lena, my mama used to say, a good fight don't end with a win, it ends with a change. You're changing this town, girl." Lena smiled, her throat tight, and hugged the older woman. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't just carrying her mom's legacy, she was building her own. 6 months had passed since Lena Washington turned Mama Jo's diner into something more than a greasy spoon in Willow Creek. And the place was alive in a way it hadn't been in decades. Friday nights were now open mic nights, with string lights twinkling above the booths, the jukebox turned off, and folks from all over town crowding in to share poems, songs, and stories. The air smelled of coffee and hope, and Lena was at the heart of it. Her worn leather journal no longer hidden, but open on the counter, its pages filled with words that had sparked a quiet revolution. She moved through the diner with a confidence that felt hard-earned, pouring coffee, cracking jokes, and reading her poetry to a room that hung on her every word. She'd become a local legend, the young black waitress who'd stared down Marcus Langston, the real estate king who'd once made everyone tremble. But Lena didn't feel like a hero. She felt like herself, finally free to be the woman her mom, Denise, had raised her to be. "You don't just fight for yourself, Lena," her mom's voice echoed in her mind. "You fight for everyone who can't." Those words carried her through the long shifts, the late nights writing, the moments when she doubted if standing up to Marcus had been worth the risk. Now, looking at the packed diner, hearing the applause after Tommy read a poem about his dad's old truck, or seeing Sarah belt out a blues tune, Lena knew it was worth it. She'd turned Mama Joe's into a place where people weren't just served coffee. They were seen, heard, and valued. Marcus Langston hadn't disappeared like folks thought he might. He still came to the diner, same corner booth, same black coffee order. But the man who'd once strutted in like he owned the town was different now. His suits were still sharp, his Rolex still gleamed, but the sneer was gone, replaced by a quietness that made people do a double take. He'd sit through open mic nights, sipping his coffee, watching Lena with eyes that held something new, respect maybe, or something close to it. He didn't talk much, but he listened, and that was a change nobody in Willow Creek had expected. Lena noticed it too, the way he'd linger after her readings, his gaze softer, like he was trying to figure out how a 20-year-old waitress had unrattled him. She didn't trust him, not fully. Men like Marcus don't change overnight. But she saw the cracks in his armor, the way he tipped generously now, the way he'd nod at Tommy instead of barking orders. One evening, as the diner was closing, Marcus caught her wiping down the counter and cleared his throat, his voice low and hesitant. "Lena, I owe you an apology," he said, the words sounding like they'd been dragged out of him. "I was wrong. The way I treated you, Tommy, everyone, it wasn't right." Lena paused, her rag still in hand, her heart thumping. She'd waited for this, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt heavy, real. "I appreciate that, Mr. Langston," she said, her voice steady but kind. "But it's not just about me. It's about doing better for everyone." He nodded, his eyes dropping to the floor, and for the first time, Lena saw a man who wasn't just powerful. He was human, flawed, and trying to find his way back. The diner wasn't the only thing that had changed. Willow Creek itself felt different, like it had woken up from a long sleep. People talked more openly now, not just about the weather or the high school football team, but about the things that mattered: race, class, the way folks like Marcus had held the town in a chokehold for too long. Lena's open mic nights had become a kind of town square, where a farmer could share a story about losing his land, or a kid like Tommy could read a poem and feel like he mattered. Miss Ellie, the elderly woman who'd first stood up for Lena, started bringing her church choir to sing gospel, filling the diner with harmonies that made people cry. Old Man Jenkins, Lena's former teacher, began mentoring kids who showed up to read, telling them about Lena's high school days when she'd won poetry contests and dreamed of college. Even Mama Joe, who'd run the diner for 30 years, started smiling more, saying, "Lena, you've made this place a home." Lena felt it too, but she carried a quiet weight. She knew change wasn't easy, that Marcus's apology didn't erase the past, that some folks still whispered about her stirring up trouble. But every time she doubted herself, she'd touch her journal, think of her mom's late-night shifts at the hospital, and remember why she'd spoken up, because dignity wasn't something you could buy or sell. One crisp fall evening, as the sun dipped low and painted Willow Creek in shades of gold, Lena stood at the counter, her journal open, preparing for another open mic night. The diner was buzzing, packed with familiar faces and new ones from towns over, all drawn by the stories they'd heard about the waitress who'd taken on a millionaire. Lena took the mic, her hands steady, her voice clear. "This one's for my mom," she said, "and for everyone who's ever felt invisible." She read a poem she'd written that morning, its lines weaving together her trailer park childhood, her mom's calloused hands, and the fire that had carried her through Marcus's cruelty. "They tried to bury me in shadows deep, but I grew roots where their words can't reach. My name's my own, my heart's my crown. I'll rise, and I won't back down." The room erupted in applause, louder than ever, and Lena saw tears in Miss Ellie's eyes, pride in Jenkins's smile, even a nod from Marcus in the back. Tommy hugged her after, whispering, "You're my hero, Lena." She laughed, brushing it off, but her heart swelled. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a voice, a spark, a reminder that one person's courage could light up a whole town.
At a natural pace of 150 to 160 words per minute. Maintain clarity and light emotional nuance suitable for American storytelling. Marcus stayed late that night, lingering over his coffee as the crowd thinned out. He approached Lena as she was stacking chairs, his voice softer than she'd ever heard. "Lena, I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said, about doing better. I want to help, maybe fund a scholarship for kids like Tommy, or, I don't know, something real." Lena studied him, searching for the catch, but his eyes were earnest, almost pleading. "That's a start, Mr. Langston," she said, her smile small but genuine. "Just keep showing up." He nodded, and for the first time, Lena saw a man who wasn't trying to control the room, just trying to find his place in it. As she walked home under the stars, her mom's old radio tucked under her arm, Lena felt a peace she hadn't known before. She'd changed Willow Creek, not by tearing it down, but by building something new. A place where stories mattered, where dignity won. And as she looked back at the dyer's glowing sign, she knew her mom would be proud, not just of her, but of the legacy they'd both created. One poem, one fight, one heart at a time. The story of Lena Washington and Mama Joe's Diner reminds us that courage isn't just about standing up to bullies like Marcus Langston. It's about standing up for your own worth, no matter how loud the world tries to drown you out. Lena's journey teaches us that dignity is not for sale, and no amount of money or power can strip away the value of a human heart. In the face of prejudice, whether it's based on race, class, or dreams deemed too big, we all have a choice: to stay silent or to speak our truth, even when our voice shakes. As the old American saying goes, you can't judge a book by its cover. And Lena's story shows that beneath every underestimated exterior lies a strength that can change a room, a town, even a heart as hardened as Marcus's. For those of us who've ever felt invisible or belittled, this story is a gentle nudge to recognize our own power, to break free from toxic silence, and to build spaces where everyone's story matters. It's a call to see the humanity in others, to challenge biases with kindness and conviction, and to remember that real change starts with one brave step. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did Lena's story stir in you? Have you ever faced a moment where you had to stand up for your worth? Drop a comment below, share your own stories, hit that like button to show some love, and subscribe to catch more stories that spark reflection and hope. Here's to finding peace after the storm and carrying a little more courage in tomorrow.